At a House Veterans Affairs Committee hearing last week, Representative Pappas questioned witnesses about veteran suicide prevention. His line of questioning focused on the transition of service members to civilian life, as suicide rates for veterans are higher during the first few months after being separated from active duty. Pappas praised the VA's Solid Start program for helping ease the transition back to civilian life and to help combat suicide among service members. He also raised concern about the legacy of the Don't Ask, Don't Tell policy on LGBTQ+ veterans and the issues those veterans face when seeking help.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. And Dr. Campbell, I have a question for you. And I want to focus in on the transition to civilian life, which we know is not always easy. And unfortunately, suicide rates for all veterans, regardless of demographics, spiked during the first few months after being separated from active duty. I think that's why VBA's Solid Start program is such an essential component of VA's public health model, particularly as part of its universal and targeted prevention efforts that are geared toward populations to prevent or lower risks for suicide and are geared at those with higher identified risks, respectively. So we know that this legislation is pending on the floor right now. I commend Representative Slotkin and Senator Hassan for introducing this legislation. I'm hopeful that we can get it across the finish line soon. And I'm just wondering if you can reflect on how the provisions in the Solid Start Act will help VA's ability to support veterans during their transition to civilian life and more effectively implement your public health model, specifically regarding universal and targeted prevention efforts.
Thank you, sir, for that very important question. I'll defer to Dr. Miller.
Yeah, great question. Solid Start, I think, addresses important communication at a critical time. We all know, those of us who are veterans, the experience of TAPS and receiving a lot of information, fire hose sort of experience, and trying to incorporate it. Solid Start is highly advantageous to our veterans because it offers repeated opportunities for information, and that information tailored in accordance with the veterans' requests and needs. I think it also gets at an underlying dynamic that we know is so important with this population, and that's trust. We know that service members transitioning experience decreased levels of trust in the VA and federal government overall. Solid Start offers personal contacts that help to build that sense of trust and then in turn convert into engagement in healthcare system for prevention and intervention services.
Well, thanks very much for that response. And I wanted to turn to the issue of LGBTQ+ veterans. And one of the best tools that the VA has to combat veteran suicide is providing mental health services. But we know that the legacy of Don't Ask, Don't Tell continues to get in the way and prevent LGBTQ veterans from accessing VA benefits like life-saving mental health services, and that can have devastating effects. According to VA, LGBTQ+ veterans who could not or did not serve openly in the military experience higher rates of depression and PTSD. In fact, one study on the mental health of LGBTQ veterans found that nearly 15% of them attempt suicide, compared to less than 1% for the entire veteran population. So we have been working on legislation to address this through the SERV Act. I'm going to continue to find ways to move that legislation forward, but I think the connection here is clear. And VA's directive last year related to LGBTQ veterans that have been impacted by Don't Ask, Don't Tell was certainly a positive step forward, but I remain concerned about their plight. So I'm wondering if what resources and outreach efforts directed toward LGBTQ+ veterans as part of VA's public health model can address this situation.
Thank you for that question, sir. Very important question. And we have resources in terms of our cultural competency and diversity on this issue. And I will also ask for Dr. Miller to add more detail in terms of what's happening with suicide prevention.
Yeah, real quickly, I think one of the most important things that has occurred within the last 6 months is the creation, implementation of a clinical reminder, specifically offering the opportunity for veterans and their caregivers to talk directly about LGBTQ status and issues. That clinical reminder and completing it will allow us first to better understand population and number, and second and most importantly, to tailor services through VHA and VBA accordingly.
And also, sir, I would like to add that I think it is critical that when we hire staff, that staff is reflective of the demographics that we serve. And so we do our best to make sure that the staff who are treating our patient represents this demographic. Thank you.
Well, thank you for that. And I think continued focus on implementing VA's directive on veterans caught up in don't ask, don't tell is important, and closing those gaps in outreach is really critical to making sure that these veterans receive the mental health services that they deserve. With that, I'll yield back, Mr. Chairman.